Now we get to switch gears, talk a little bit about the little national and statewide political news, and GOP political strategist Matt Mackowiak joins us now on the program. Good morning, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing great, Chad. Good morning.
Thanks for joining us today. Where do we begin with the White House? I guess Reince Priebus is out. There will be a new chief of staff in the White House. This makes in the 7 months or so of the Trump administration, 2 chief of staffs, 2 press secretaries, and 2 communications directors?
Yeah, a lot of turnover, a lot of chaos.
This isn't normal, right?
No, this is definitely not normal.
Okay.
This is the opposite of normal. I mean, look, White House jobs are stressful, and there is turnover. And actually, what is fairly normal is young presidencies often do have challenges early on. Clinton did, Obama did, Bush certainly did. So this is not that unusual, but it's just not helpful for the Trump White House to be so chaotic as it is. Look, he's obviously been thinking about changing his chief of staff for some time. That's a decision he has to make, and he's made it. The best case scenario is that General Kelly does get the White House under control internally in terms of the processes for how the president receives information, who has access to him, what the reporting structure is. And given his organizational leadership experience and experience running the Department of Homeland Security, I think there's a high degree of confidence that he can. If he can't do it, probably no one can. So that'll be his biggest challenge. Of course, the downside is, very little political experience. He did serve 2 secretaries of defense as a top aide, and so he would have some familiarity with Capitol Hill. Of course, he's testified in front of the relevant committees in the first 6 months as Homeland Security Secretary, but not a lot of political experience. Doesn't have a lot of experience with a broader range of policy issues outside defense and Homeland Security, doesn't have a lot of high-level relationships up on Capitol Hill, and is a newcomer to the Trump team, at least in the way that he's going to be working as chief of staff. So, this could work out very well, or it could not work out at all. It just remains to be seen. The biggest thing for Kelly is he has to manage both down and up. Manage down in terms of the senior staff, get them to stop leaking, stop fighting with each other, start working as a cohesive unit. But he has to manage up, too. I mean, the president has got to become far more disciplined and far more focused going forward if they're going to really try to achieve what they want to achieve this first year. We're already 6 months in, and he hasn't had a major legislative accomplishment yet.
So what faction is winning? There's been no shortage of stories about different factions, but then the White House, some that are maybe a little more liberal than others, some that are more establishment Republican than others, and more that are more populist or nationalist factions like Steve Bannon. Who's winning? Who's still around? I mean, this thing keeps moving around, it seems, and Ivanka Trump is now trying to say that she doesn't have a huge role in with her father. I mean, where's this thing going?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Because that defines his presidency, right? Who has his ear?
It does. I mean, I think what's important here is the biggest question really is he delivering on the promises he made as a candidate, right? Look, I think one of the things that I often hear, Chad, is this argument that, Trump hasn't done anything. Well, then I always wonder, my response to that is, then why are Democrats protesting, right? Yeah. I mean, the answer is he hasn't accomplished major things legislatively yet, and that has to be deeply frustrating. Healthcare, tax reform, infrastructure, building the wall, those things haven't happened yet 6 months in. And generally, presidents do get some of what they want early on. Generally, they have a honeymoon period. Generally, the losing party feels duty-bound to work with the new president, find areas of common ground. That obviously didn't happen. But if you look at the things that he has done, the executive orders he's put in place, he has signed legislation, major reform of the VA, putting a Supreme Court justice on the court, excellent justice, pulling out of TPP, approving the pipelines. I mean, there's a lot of things he's done, and they have had an effect. The question is it all going to be short term? Is it all going to be executive orders, which, as we know from the Obama years, a new president can turn back, or is it going to be lasting? I mean, part of the difference between an executive order in something like Obamacare is it takes legislation to undo previous legislation. That's part of why Obamacare is so difficult. It wasn't an executive order. It was a bill that passed the House and the Senate, was signed by the president. Now, to your question, look, there are warring factions. Maggie Haberman of the New York Times said it's not like there are two teams in the White House. It's like there are six teams. And so it's kind of hard to know day to day or week to week who's up and who's down because there's so many issues the White House is dealing with. There's issues, here or there where social conservatives get a win, or where national security conservatives get a win, or where the populist wing gets a win. So it's a little bit hard to sort of analyze overall who's up and who's down. I mean, the basic sense right now is that Bannon may be on a little bit of thin ice, not clear what his future is, that Ivanka Trump has not had the kind of effect on policy that she wanted to have in moderating her father on a range of issues. But again, I mean, what matters here is kind of not the personalities. What matters is the policy. And on the big issues that Trump has ran on and was elected on, he's done about all he can do through executive orders and through the cabinet. Yeah. Now it's a question of, is he going to have major legislative accomplishments in his first 2 years? We've got 6 months left. They're going to make a big push on tax reform starting this week. I think there's a real sense of urgency that they have to find a way to pass tax reform this year, get the economy going. If they can do infrastructure this year as well, I think they're going to make an effort there too, and there may be an effort to combine them to try to get Democratic votes for tax reform. And I'm not convinced that repealing, replacing Obamacare is fully dead. They still have one more bite at the apple before the end of September when the reconciliation window closes, and then a new reconciliation window opens. So now they probably want to use that for tax reform, but they're looking to see if there's another way to get 50 votes in the U.S. Senate before September 30th. I'm not convinced that that's dead. I really am not.
Interesting. With tax reform, and before we let you go, in an ideal world, Republicans wanted to repeal and replace Obamacare first, because that was going to lead to bigger tax reform.
Right.
So where do we go now? Do they wait, or do they pass as much as possible, and then if they can repeal and replace, then they come back and add the tax reform?
Yeah, this is one of the big questions, and this is why the sequencing was so important. This is why they started with health care. Which strategically, may prove to have been a big mistake and will be something I think historians and political analysts will look at for some time. They wanted to do health care first because if they took the Obamacare taxes, that was going to basically give them an additional $1 trillion to play with in the tax reform side, so they can do a bigger and bolder tax cut. They want to do corporate rate reduction. I saw something this morning about trying to go down to a 20% corporate rate or perhaps even a 15% corporate rate. But then they also want to do individual tax reform, broaden the base, lower the rates, go from, I think there's something like 6 rate categories now. They want to go down to 3 or 4. What's going to be interesting here is, Republicans generally want to cut taxes across the board, but Trump may want to really focus on the middle class. And so the question is, can they do a big enough tax reform that is really going to show economic growth in the short and medium term? Because the worst case scenario is they pass sort of a modest tax reform bill and they don't get the economic benefit from it, and they get less government revenue, which swells the deficit and the debt over time. So it's going to be very interesting. And of course, as you raise, the issue you raise is, what is the sequencing here? Do they somehow find a way to get the additional $1 trillion by doing health care in time before tax reform is done? I think there still is a chance they can do health care before the end of September. I would say the odds are against it, but there's still a chance. And if they do, if the taxes are removed, or at least partially removed, they could apply that to tax reform.
Very interesting. Matt, tell folks about your podcast and how they can get signed up for that morning newsletter.
Yeah, as you know, we've got almost 4,000 Texans that read the must-read Texas morning email newsletter, including yourself. Top news from around the state put together, emailed out every weekday morning, mustreadtexas.com. My podcast is called Mac, M-A-C-K, on Politics. It's available in the iTunes Store, Google Play, Stitcher, and on the web at maconpolitics.com. I think we've had 37 episodes now. Top newsmakers, great conversations. I think your audience would find it very interesting.
Great, Matt. Thank you as always, and we'll visit with you next week.
Take care.
That's Matt Mackowiak here on the Chad Hasty Show. News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM KFYO.